Hi everyone, my name is Becky Dalton, and I did my lit review on the effects of social workers in schools. My question was, do mental health interventions administered through social workers increase academic performance in children? Basically, was there a correlation between the presence of social workers in schools and higher academic performance? This subject was really important to me because I felt like the more I studied social work, the more we dive into it, the more I understand the importance of a basic level ground for everyone, equality for every person. They all get the same kind of education, but that's hard to do and hard to obtain, but it is still possible. But why is this important to you, or why should it be important to you? So some of the numbers, statistic numbers, are that 1 in 5 children have a diagnosable mental disorder. An even more alarming statistic is that 2/3 of those children are not getting the mental health services that they need for that. So we know that public schools are catalysts for mental health services in children. This is not just for mental health. The public schools act as catalysts for proper nutrition, being fed, having proper hygiene. And so it's only natural that we would also use the public schools as a catalyst for mental health as well. We do know that social work interventions equal an increase in graduation and college enrollment, which is what we'll show you in the next few slides here. Social workers, history of social workers and schools. This is kind of interesting. I felt in 1890 through 1917, school was just basically for the elite. There weren't many working class individuals in schools because what they were teaching wasn't going to be relevant for them in the wheat fields. When they decided that they wanted to incorporate the more general public, they needed to figure out a way to keep the enrolled there. And also they needed to find relevance for the parents, because the parents didn't want to just leave their children, send their children off when they were really good work in the fields, knowing that they wouldn't be able to use the skills in school. So they really needed to find more ways to appeal to the general public, which they started to incorporate hygiene, physical health, and proper social adjustment. So from the early beginnings, scholastic learning wasn't just the only thing that they taught in schools. There was importance in other areas of life that needed to be taught in schools. So that was interesting. Some individuals felt mental health was not relevant because those tax dollars were for secular education and not mental health. I'm sure there's still people there today that feel that way. And today there are still some discrepancies between social workers and faculty in schools. Some of the examples of those that I found in research were that teachers felt like students were using social workers as scapegoats to shirk responsibilities. But social workers felt like teachers felt so much pressure for increased testing numbers that that pressure was trickled down to the students, and they felt the pressure as well. And social workers didn't feel like that was really appropriate, that there was too much stress being put on the children for these testings. And also they didn't feel like there was a lot of support when it came around time for budgets, because they always had low funds. Not always, I shouldn't say always, but they usually had low funds and little time, particularly for what they felt like they needed to do and what work was there. They didn't have the funds to fund the time to get that done. So correlation, this is where the rubber met the road for me. This is where I found a lot of really cool examples of this in working motion. So we already kind of know public knowledge, but also research has shown that children don't perform well in schools if they are suffering from mental health disorder. We also saw in research that interventions such as problem solving and individual consultations have shown to decrease the learning gap in students. This is huge. A student is up here, another student is down here. Through individual consultations and problem solving, we've been able to decrease that gap and bring them together, which is amazing. In schools where budgets were increased for mental health services, they saw an increase in graduation. Let me give you an example of that. Colorado State increased their budget by $16 million to include jobs for 220 social workers in schools for their state. The results for that were an increase in graduation by 30%. Now, they saw savings of $300 million because they didn't have to use so much of that for support for high school dropouts in the form of tax cuts, welfare system, things like that. Because they weren't dropouts, they were succeeding, which is what we want. So some of the research that we found was that O'Connor examined 6 schools whose counseling practices had increased attendance and boosted morale. They were getting more kids in their seats, and they were happier about it, which is pretty cool. A questionnaire was given on what areas could be improved as far as mental health services in schools in Nebraska. So they took 210 respondents of Nebraska faculty, and their choices were given in this questionnaire ranging between 1 and 4, strongly disagree to strongly agree. All respondents, so 210 out of 210, felt like there was some degree of mental health services that could be improved upon in the following areas, but not limited to bullying, group and individual therapy, crisis, drug and suicide prevention. There is still little research, though, in the areas of intervention and techniques that have proven to be beneficial in mental health interventions in schools, which is surprising because given the numbers. So the discussion, what do we know at this point? We know that public schools are seeing a rising need for mental health services. We're also seeing that students have shown direct correlation between social work intervention and better academic performance. However, there still remains little time and low funding for these mental health services in public schools. Why is that? Some of the strengths and weaknesses in this literature review are the strengths were that no matter where we looked, there was always the same basic result, is that there is a strong correlation between social work interventions in schools and higher academic performance. Another strength I found was that there was an array of different types of research that was conducted to show the same result. Some of the weaknesses were that little is known about the types of interventions that are most successful, and this subject warrants more hours than dedicated for the purpose of this assignment. There were so many rabbit holes I could have followed that were so interesting, but I just had to cut it off somewhere. But there was really more research to be done here, obviously. And the use of EBSCOhost and journal articles are what we were supposed to use, but I felt like maybe once I got more experience, I'd be able to find some relevant research in other areas as well. And lastly, the comparison studies were hard to obtain because virtually every school district is different. They're all funded based on their taxpayer dollars. They all have different demographics. It's a different public education system in every district. So it's just really hard to find comparison studies there. I loved this quote from Aristotle. It really encapsulates the whole feel for this research project, which was, educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. We really need to focus on educating the whole self. There is so much more to just scholastic learning in public schools. There's mental and physical and emotional health that needs education for people that need to know what's going on with their bodies, not just with life. And we know that school has acted like a catalyst in other areas to facilitate the needs of children. Why not mental health as well? So a last question for you. Mental health issues in children are rising. What is the answer? Hopefully that you will agree with me that more mental health intervention in public schools is needed for these numbers to start to decrease. And here are my references. Thanks everybody for watching.